Nazir Torekulov was the first ever Kazakh to hold a high diplomatic post in the Soviet Union. The history of the Soviet-Saudi relationship's formation and its subsequent development is inextricably linked to Torekulov's name. From today's perspective, we can say that Torekulov's legacy, to a certain extent, had an impact on the positive development of cooperation between modern-day Kazakhstan and the Saudi Kingdom. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. An open letter to Stalin, August the 17th, 1939. Stalin, you have declared me an outlaw. You have fettered the country with the fear of terror. Even a daredevil cannot throw the truth in your face. With the cruelty of a sadist, you beat up people that are useful and necessary for the country. They only seem dangerous from your personal dictatorship's point of view, knowing that due to the lack of manpower, every cultured and experienced diplomat is especially valuable. You lured to Moscow and destroyed, one by one, almost all Soviet plenipotentiaries. You completely destroyed the entire apparatus of the People's Commissariat for Foreign Affairs, destroying the best and the brightest of our country. You've ruined talented and promising diplomats in the prime of their lives. Raskolnikov, FF.
Soviet ambassador to Bulgaria, Fyodor Raskolnikov, wrote this open letter to Joseph Stalin in August of 1939. In Europe, it made a huge splash. In the USSR, it was of course banned, because it practically became the first public accusation of Stalin personally and the exposure of his criminal regime. As a diplomat, Raskolnikov paid special attention to repressions of the NKVD system, the system of the People's Commissariat for Foreign Affairs. The Soviet diplomatic service had also gone through a massive purge and was practically destroyed. In particular, by the beginning of the 1940s, 5 deputy People's Commissars for Foreign Affairs, in today's terms 5 vice ministers, 48 plenipotentiary ambassadors, 30 heads of NKVD departments, 28 heads of consular missions, and 113 other employees of the USSR Foreign Ministry fell victim to the repressions. One of them was the protagonist of our film, the ambassador of the Soviet Union in Saudi Arabia and the first Kazakh diplomat, Nazir Torekulov. He was accused of counter-revolutionary activities, pan-Turkism, terrorism and espionage in favor of Turkey. And by the verdict of the USSR's military collegium of the Supreme Court, he was shot on October 3, 1937, in Moscow.
Nazir Torekulov. Oil, blood and sand.
Saudi Arabia, the largest state on the Arabian Peninsula and one of the richest countries in the world. Today, the kingdom ranks first in oil production, and often the Arabs have the final say in the world's energy market. Billions of barrels of black gold and tons of petroleum dollars have made Saudi Arabia an oasis in the middle of the desert. Modern cities, skyscrapers, expensive cars, chic, brilliance and beauty. All this is the modern Saudi Arabia. But it wasn't always like this. Some 90 years ago, this was one of the poorest and most backward countries inhabited by nomadic tribes. This, the kingdom of Hejaz and Najd and the annexed regions, was what the Soviet diplomat Nazir Torekulov saw when he first arrived here.
Товарищ Torekulov.
Comrade Torekulov, what is this all for? Why do they need it? Who they?
Ну, там, в Москве.
The guys in Moscow, and the locals too. There is only sand, with no end, no water, no people, and no use.
Моисей, Эти пустыни
Moses, people have mastered and settled in this desert thousands of years ago. Don't you know? Here, drink some water, and for thousands of years there has been no better place for them.
нет для них земли лучше и дороже.
Интересно, чем же она так дорога?
What good is this place? There aren't even any roads, only dunes in every corner. That's boring.
Мой юный друг,
My young friend, as a future diplomat, you must understand one thing. There are no boring countries. There are only boring ambassadors.
пойдем.
The Age of Discoveries, when Europeans searched for and discovered new lands and sea routes to Africa, America, Asia, and Oceania, ended in the 17th century. By the beginning of the 20th century, humankind had already learned everything there was to know about the planet. There was almost no land left unknown or unseen. Terra incognita became only a figure of speech and a dream of romantics. However, the territories and countries conquered in the first wave of colonial wars still remained an enviable asset for many rival powers. And the First World War, which caused the collapse of 4 empires, gave a new impetus to the competition for the new lands. The real bone of contention was the scorching hot Arabia, which previously was the domain of the Ottoman Empire, the legacy of which was now divided between Britain, France, Germany, and Italy.
Именно в разгар этой геополитической борьбы в октябре 1928 года на
It was during this geopolitical struggle, in October of 1928, that Nazir Torekulov arrived in the sacred land of the Arabian Peninsula. He came to the kingdom of Hejaz and Najd, which is what modern Saudi Arabia used to be called, as an ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary of the Soviet Union. He was immediately dragged into the very center of the diplomatic struggle, conspiracies and intrigues, characteristic of the geopolitics of the highest level. Here is how Gayaz Ishaki, the leader of the Tatar intelligentsia in exile, described Torekulov's arrival in Mecca.
At the endless sounds of the horn, a car appeared on the streets of Mecca, decorated with red flags, with a hammer and a sickle. There were 2 people in it. The younger one was none other than Nazir Torekulov, the representative of the Soviets in Hejaz.
The Middle East in general, and the land of Arabs in particular, attracted the most extraordinary and bright people from all over the world like a magnet. The list of fame, power, and wealth seekers has names of already legendary British spies. Edward Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, Mohammed Assad, who was a German Jew named Leopold Weiss before converting to Islam, and John Philby, or Sheikh Abdallah, father of the famous Soviet-British double agent Kim Philby.
Name is Philby. John Philby. Gentlemen.
Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Philby. Heard a lot about you. Suppose you have a different name too.
Well, Arabians call me Sheikh Abdullah, and I'm an advisor to the king and a good friend of his successor. And what about you?
Torekulov. Nazir Torekulov. An honor to meet you. I represent the interests of the Soviet Union here in Arabia.
And what exactly are the interests of the Soviet Union?
Representation of our country, and we support the Arabs and were the first to recognize the state of the Saudi king.
Keep in mind, Mr. Torekulov, that the Great Britain provided the Arabs with independence, and that their flag will always flutter in our way.
Is your confidence based on the king's position or the views of his successor?
You are spot on, my colleague.
It is, as you know, the eternal dispute between wisdom and youth. A true Englishman. Arrogant. Didn't say goodbye. From the report of Nazir Torekulov to Moscow, Jeddah, December the 9th, 1928. I met with Philby yesterday, a peculiar individual, a cunning man, but some of his actions are glaringly sloppy. He is an agent of the Committee of the National Defense, and he throws the money around. His real activity runs counter to his words. There are documents proving this. We are collecting these documents showing Philby's true face to present them to the king.
And just like that, the Soviet diplomat Torekulov joined the party, diving into a complex political game, the main prize in which was the trust of the Arabian monarch and the opportunity to influence his decisions.
Abdulaziz bin Abdul Rahman bin Faisal Al Saud, the king of Hijaz and Najd and the surrounded regions, the founder of the first king of Saudi Arabia. He showed himself to be a wise politician, a brave warrior, and a talented commander. He was able to unite the desperate Arab and Bedouin tribes and create a single state, which he named after his own Saudi dynasty. Presentation of credentials, October the 3rd, 1928.
Ваше Королевское Высочество.
Your Royal Highness, I have the honor to present my credentials to Your Royal Highness as a representative of His Royal Majesty, the King of Hejaz and Najd. By issuing the credentials, the chairperson of the Central Executive Committee of the USSR authorizes me as a diplomatic agent and General Consul of the Soviet Union.
Upon arrival at the royal palace, Nazir Torekulov could not present his credentials personally to the monarch since he was on a trip. However, thanks to this, an equally important acquaintance of the ambassador to the heir of the throne, Prince Faisal, took place.
Faisal bin Abdulaziz ibn Abdul Rahman Al Saud is the third son of King Abdulaziz, the right hand and viceroy of the king in Hejaz, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and heir to the throne. King Faisal's name is closely connected to all further successes and victories of the kingdom.
Indeed, being born a diplomat and a man of high intuition and intelligence, Nazir Torekulov established a trusting relationship with the Crown Prince from the very first meeting. And Faisal Al Saud himself, being a man of a sharp mind, was able to immediately appreciate the Soviet envoy, not only as a political figure, but as a decent person and a political friend and ally. This is evidenced by many joint photos. This photograph is dated back to 1929. Here, Nazir Torekulov, together with the future king of Saudi Arabia, Faisal, are depicted during a joint trip to Jeddah. Elegant, stylishly dressed, graceful and handsome, Nazir Torekulov always stood out from the crowd.
В архиве Министерства иностранных дел сохранились документы, вернее...
The archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs preserved documents, or rather memos, dated June 20th, 1928, with orders from the tailoring of formal suits for Torekulov at the expense of the Commissariat of Foreign Affairs. Remember the excerpt from The Little Golden Calf by Ilya Ilf and Yevgeny Petrov? In the big building of the National Commissariat of Foreign Affairs, the tailor Zhurkevich sewed tailcoats for Soviet diplomats serving abroad day and night. It's unknown whether Torekulov's costumes were sewn by the same Zhurkevich, but they looked great on him.
Amazing, comrade, amazing.
Да?
Yes, if ambassadors are judged by their looks. Then I have nothing to worry about. Who was the contact from the Turkish side?
Я контактировал.
I had contact only with the attorneys of Turkish affairs, Seni Bey and Şevket Bey. And what about the Turkish agent Mustafa Javad?
to whom you passed secret data on Torekullov's orders.
Я не знаю никакого Мустафа Джавада. В 30-м году
I do not know any Mustafa Javad. In 1930, Mahmud Bey, the new consul, arrived in Jeddah, but he died almost immediately. We did not even have the chance to meet each other. A month later, Abdullah Mahfouz arrived to replace him, but you know him too. He was an ambassador, not a spy.
он посол, а не шпион.
And who were you, Torekulov? An ambassador or a spy?
Везде, где бы я ни был,
Wherever I went, I defended the interests of the Soviet government and the Soviet people.
А ваши соратники,
Torekulov, your comrades in arms, or rather accomplices, tell a completely different story. Moscow, November 1927. Kremlin, Stalin's office.
Георгий Васильевич, чем же вам не нравится товарищ Алиев?
Comrade Checherin, why don't you like Comrade Aliyev? He is recommended by the Central Committee's personal department. He speaks Arabic fluently, and he is from the Caucasus.
Товарищ Сталин, я считаю,
Comrade Stalin, I think in this matter it's more important where to and not where from. Arabia in general and Hijaz in particular is the very heart of the Muslim world. We need a diplomat.
Вы хотите
Do you want to say that the Caucasus people are not diplomatic?
товарищ Сталин,
Comrade Stalin, of course, Aliyev speaks Arabic fluently, but Comrade Torekulov is the only one who will be able to fully implement our policy in the Arab world. Torekulov from the Central Publishing House. Yes, Comrade Stalin, Torekulov holds the position of the chairperson of the USSR Central Publishing House, a man of extraordinary abilities, which allow him to observe the entire Muslim world from Morocco to Indonesia. His intellectual potential, knowledge of the Muslim world, and worldview allow us to hope that such a person will be able to fully carry out the functions of the ambassador of the USSR.
Хорошо, товарищ Чечерин. Я вынесу ваше
All right, Comrade Checherin.
на заседание.
I will add your proposal to the agenda of the Politburo meeting. I think the party will support Comrade Torekulov's candidacy.
Такое пристальное внимание к
Such particular attention to the appointment of each ambassador on the part of Stalin in the top leadership of the Communist Party is easy to explain. By the beginning of the 1930s, the Soviet government had official diplomatic relations with no more than 30 foreign states. Therefore, each appointment and each candidate were considered with the utmost attention. However, Stalin personally decided on the issue of the approval and appointment of Nazir Torekulov. On December 15, 1927, by the decree of the Presidium of the Central Executive Committee of the USSR, Nazir Torekulov was appointed the ambassador of the Soviet Union to the Kingdom of Hejaz and Najd. The debut of Nazir Torekulov as a diplomat in such a complex and important issue turned out to be a success. Being a talented and smart person, by the age of 36, he gained a vast experience in organizational and political activities. The main thing is that he easily found a common ground with people and had innate charisma, as befits a real diplomat. A short time after arriving in Arabia, Nazir masters the Arabic language, so much so that he no longer needs translators, which makes him stand out from the ambassadors of England and France. Here is what he writes in his report to Moscow on this matter.
Jeddah, December the 9th, 1928. I began to chat in Arabic. In 3-4 months, I think for sure I'll no longer need the translators. Otherwise, you say one thing, they translate it as another, and the main point is lost. I've established good connections, and I think gradually a lot can be done. It is difficult, but nothing is impossible.
Another decisive difference between Nazir Torekulov as an ambassador and his colleagues in the diplomatic corps was his religious affiliation. A born Muslim who received religious education from a very young age, Nazir had a fine understanding of the fundamentals of Islam, and even though he represented the Soviet atheistic government, and perhaps for this very reason, Torekulov strictly observed the requirements of Islam, performed the Hajj and Umrah like a true Muslim, which in general opened wider doors for the Soviet ambassador.
В Джедде именно вот в этом здании располагалось посольство Советского Союза. И именно здесь 1900...
The Soviet Union embassy was situated in this building in the old Jeddah. It was here that Nazir Torekulov worked from 1928 to 1936. He spent all his time here, working hard. And in rare hours of rest, he went out into the courtyard. Exhausted by the Arabian heat, he perhaps sat in the shade of this sprawling tree and enjoyed the coolness. As for Abdulaziz Al Saud, the king and the keeper of the two holy places, he and his court spent the most of their time on the holy land of Mecca or Medina, access to which was strictly prohibited for non-Muslims. Nazir Torekulov, of course, enjoyed such a natural advantage, while the king trusted and sympathized with the devoted Muslim Nazir. Their friendly and even somewhat informal relationship at the very least can be seen from the following correspondence.
To His Royal Majesty, I arrived in Jeddah. I will be happy to personally pay my respects in the nearest future. To His Excellency the Ambassador of the USSR, we express our gratitude and joy on the occasion of your safe arrival. Ready to set up a meeting after your arrival in Mecca, Abdulaziz.
Of course, the ambassadors of European states didn't have such an opportunity to freely visit the king in his Meccan residence. However, the most determined of them even converted to Islam. The first were the above-mentioned Leopold Weiss and John Philby.
From the report of Nazir Torekulov to Moscow, having converted to Islam, Philby set out to Mecca. Having performed the rites in the temple, he went to Taif. There was a solemn greeting. Philby spends all the time in Mecca with the king. Rumors are he's seeking a concession from the king for the construction of a power plant and allegedly arranges a loan of £800,000 for the king in London.
Mr. Torekulov, we stand here, on the sacred land of Arabia, the cradle of Islam. I wonder, why, being a faithful Muslim and true diplomat, you didn't change the dress code, a hat and a tie, for Kantura, Gutra and Ekal, as a matter of course.
Mr. Philby, as an old Arabic proverb goes, that is the religion of fidelity, spirituality and fidelity of a true Muslim, and not in external attributes, but in his thoughts, his words, and his deeds. And I hope you understand.
And what do you make of an official stance of a country that you represent? The civilized world considers the Soviet government to be nothing short of infidels, for whom nothing is sacred.
As you correctly noted, colleague, I am a representative of the Soviet government. I participated in the revolution. There was even a period in my life when I led Soviet Turkestan. And this did not prevent me from pushing for and signing a resolution on the transfer of the day off from Sunday to Friday, as is customary throughout the Muslim world. So, do not believe everything that people say, my friend, you hear from evil tongues.
Левый СССР. Член РКПБ с 18-го. Да вы же большевик.
A left socialist revolutionary, a member of the Bolsheviks party from 1918. Torekulov, where does your love for religious holidays come from? Why have you introduced them in Turkestan?
Это моя позиция. Туркестан всегда был духовным.
This is my position. Turkestan has always been a spiritual center. Millions of Muslims live there. They have traditions that do not interfere with the building of communism. I was thinking about the people.
Религия — это опиум для народа. Еще сам Остап Бендер говорил.
Religion is the opium of the masses, as the fictional Ostap Bender used to say. Anyway, who was part of the terrorist cell in Turkestan? In Turkestan, I was engaged in education, and the only cell that I joined was the Revolutionary Committee.
А как же ваше...
And what about your sympathy and admiration for Iskulov, Sultan Galiyev and other counter-revolutionaries? Weren't you siding with them?
Если я не ошибаюсь, то были времена.
If I'm not mistaken, there were times when both Iskulov and Sultan Galiyev were admired by many in Moscow, and even Comrade Stalin himself. Shut up! Take him away. As for the opium, it was Karl Marx.
Уведите!
Ancient and mysterious Kokand. The atmosphere of religiousness and piety is still present here today. Just look at the mosque domes, blue minarets, and listen to the calling of muezzins.
Вот в такой, или, быть может, еще более аутентичной обстановке...
This is the atmosphere that Nazir Torekulov grew up in. He moved to Kokand from Turkestan along with his family. Nazir's father was a very enterprising man. He was engaged in the cotton trade, and at the beginning of the 20th century, when the demand for white gold reached its peak, he founded his own business here. Hey, Nazir, enough already. Let's go.
Қайда? Өліп қойса жолымнан таспа тіреді ғой.
Where? Do you want me to get killed?
Уайымдама, өлсең.
You'll go to heaven, don't worry. You can't find a more righteous man in all of Kokand. Endless cotton plantations and the blazing sun, this is where Nazir and Kadir fled to from the dark and stuffy cell of the madrasa to help their father. Torekul did not scold the boys. He did not associate their future with religion and did not insist on following in his footsteps. On the contrary, he wanted his sons to keep up with the times and receive a secular education. The anticipation of the new era was floating in the air, and the brothers were thrilled with the premonition of great changes. Father, is it true that cotton is called the white gold?
Yes, son, this is truly the white gold.
Father, if there is a white gold, then there must be a black gold, right? Black cotton?
I have never heard of black cotton.
When I grow up, I will definitely find the black gold. Could Nazir ever imagine that in many years, when he will set foot on Arabian soil, he would literally walk on the countless deposits of that same black gold? By the will of fate, he was just one step away from a sensational discovery that would change the entire world order. Literally a year after his death, Saudi Arabia announced the discovery of enormous reserves of oil in the depths of its deserts. For now, Ambassador Torekulov puts all of his effort into solving the issue of kerosene and gasoline supply from the USSR for the needs of the Saudi kingdom. Yes, there was a time when oil products were very scarce in Saudi Arabia and were only imported. Moreover, their supplies were completely monopolized by the Great Britain. The so-called gasoline deal became one of the main achievements of the Soviet ambassador. Against the backdrop of a general economic blockade of the USSR in the international arena and a powerful British lobby to prevent Soviet goods from entering the Hejaz market, in particular, the lifting of the trade embargo for Nazir Torekulov was a real success. It was his personal victory in the confrontation with the two companies that are now the largest in the global oil market, the Anglo-Dutch Shell and the American Chevron. In the summer of 1932, 100,000 boxes of Soviet gasoline and kerosene arrived in Arabia on the Katerina steamer.
Nina Levashova was Nazir Torekulov's second wife. He married her shortly before being appointed to the diplomatic mission. Nazir divorced his first wife, Maryam Nigmaturina, while still in Moscow. The two of them had a daughter, Anel. This is the only photograph of them together. Nazir loved his daughter very much and missed her greatly during all the years of separation.
Nina. How's it going? Tired?
No.
Well, how many are there today?
I've already had 10 patients in the morning, and there's more.
Good for you. I'm very happy for you.
Thanks. I couldn't do it without you.
Nina, do you know what the people here call me? Turns out they know me not as an ambassador, but as the husband of the lady doctor.
And it's fair, Mr. Ambassador. Please don't distract me. I've got a lot of work.
I'm proud of you.
Nina became a faithful companion to her husband and was next to him throughout all 8 years of the Arabian saga. A professional doctor by training, she provided great assistance to the Soviet embassy in its humanitarian mission. Harsh climatic conditions and the lack of a full-fledged healthcare system in the kingdom were a real disaster for the local population, which is why the presence of a qualified doctor, especially a woman, was invaluable. Indeed, not every husband in the conservative and religious society of the Saudi Arabia could allow his woman to be examined by doctors of the opposite sex. On the personal initiative of Nazir Torekulov, a dental office was also established at the embassy. Moreover, during the outbreak of malaria, Torekulov invited to Jeddah an outstanding bacteriologist, Mikhail Mashkovsky from Moscow, who, among other things, saved the life of the future king of Saudi Arabia, Prince Faisal. In May 1932, the aforementioned Prince Faisal arrives in the USSR on a historic first official visit. Nazir Torekulov played a key role in its organization. Here is what the Ogonyok magazine wrote about this visit back then.
The former province of Old Turkey has now become the center of intercontinental communications, and the commercial importance of the Arabian Peninsula is growing every year. The great international significance of the very fact of the existence of an independent national state on the Arabian Peninsula is undeniable, and the visit of the state delegation to the capitals of the countries that recognized Ibn Saud pursues the goal of strengthening the international relations of the young Arab state.
The prince was welcomed in Moscow and Leningrad by 3 of the Politburo representatives: but Stalin did not meet with the heir to the Saudi throne. To smooth out the awkwardness, Faisal was first taken to a football match at the Dynamo Stadium and then to the Bolshoi Theater to see The Barber of Seville. The icing on the cake was a trip to a factory that produced telephone equipment. This is the building. Before the revolution, it belonged to the Ericsson & Co. company of the Swedish inventor and entrepreneur Lars Magnus Ericsson. Later, the Bolsheviks will make the plant the property of the state and call it the Krasnaya Zarya. Incidentally, when drawing up the program of the visit, Nazir Torekulov insisted on including the visit to this enterprise. Moreover, he convinced the leadership that it was imperative to gift the guest with a miracle of technology, an automatic telephone exchange, in order to show the power and the level of the country's development. The Arabs did not have anything like this yet.
Алло, алло. Алло?
Your Majesty, Taif is calling. How do you hear us? Roger. Brother Nazir, I hear you well, as if you were in a neighboring tent and not in Taif. Congratulations, Your Majesty. Now this telephone exchange will serve for the benefit of your kingdom. May Allah be pleased with you, my friend. This is a real miracle. From the report of an engineer, Vasily Shitov, the first conversation on an automatic telephone happened between the king of the Arab Saudi state and the USSR ambassador, Comrade Torekulov. This conversation was the beginning of the station's operation. Vasily Shitov, engineer of the Krasnaya Zarya plant.
When conducting research for this film, we encountered a unique photograph of Nazir Torekulov, the one in the center with short hair and without the usual suit. And next to him is a young engineer, Vasily Shitov, who almost single-handedly installed, connected and set up a telephone exchange. There is also a group of young Arabs whom the king assigned to the Soviet engineer, so that they learned how to manage the automatic telephone exchange. Apparently, this picture was taken during the assembly or setup of the station. Nazir was inspired. He worked diligently despite the unbearable climate and unusual lifestyle. Even the fellow competitor's scheming could not lead him astray. The monarch himself and the most of the political elite of the kingdom increasingly turned towards the Soviet Union. This led to envy spread among the diplomats of European countries, who traditionally considered Arabia their domain. At the very beginning, in his reports prepared for the USSR and KID, Foreign Office, Torekulov wrote, "The Anglophile group led and supported by Sheikh Abdallah Philby and the British envoy Sir Andrew Ryan continues to dominate in the government apparatus in top positions." In later telegrams, he announced the decision of the king to appoint him doyen, that is, the foreman of the entire diplomatic corps. And this unique photograph clearly illustrates the position of Nazir Torekulov at the court of the Saudi throne.
The historic dispute with the British over seniority in the diplomatic corps can be considered as finished in our favor. At official celebrations, I occupy the first place. Ryan, British, the second. French charge d'affaires, Monsieur Maigret, the third. Ainul Molk, Persian, the fourth place. Ryan holds himself politely around me, treating me as a foreman.
However, in the mid-1930s, despite the success of its ambassador, the Kremlin begins to curtail the Arabian project. In 1936, Ambassador Nazir Torekulov was recalled back to Moscow. His new place of work was the Moscow Institute of Language and Writing of the Peoples of the East. Torekulov was included in the personnel reserve of the People's Commissariat for Foreign Affairs and the reserve of the Central Committee.
Upon his return to Moscow, Nazir Torekulov settles in his former apartment at number 2 on the Serafimovich Street together with his wife Nina Levashova. This is the famous, or rather infamous, first house of the government. Here, on the night of July 15, 1937, Nazir Torekulov was arrested by the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs on charges of pan-Turkism and terrorism. On October 3, 1937, he was shot by the verdict of the USSR's military collegiate of the Supreme Court. Nina Levashova was arrested and exiled to the Akhmolak camp for wives of traitors to the motherland, where she then tragically died. Nazir's daughter Anel lived in Moscow her entire life. She died in 2003 and, according to her last will, was buried, according to Muslim traditions, in her father's homeland, the city of Turkestan.
When King Abdulaziz Al Saud found out that his friend, Soviet diplomat Nazir Torekulov, had been sentenced to death and by his own government, he was shocked and took it as a personal insult. Even in such a harsh country as Saudi Arabia, where the death penalty is still in effect, the murder of such a noble and educated person as Torekulov was perceived as barbaric. This is what the son of Faisal bin Abdulaziz, one of the most famous and influential representatives of the Saudi royal family, Turki bin Faisal Al Saud, said about this in an exclusive interview.
Ваш отец, король Фейсал ибн Абдулязиз ибн Абдурахман.
When your father, King Faisal bin Abdulaziz ibn Abdulrahman Al Saud, was a prince, an heir to the throne, he had a very good relationship with the ambassador of the Soviet Union to Saudi Arabia, Nazir Torekulov. Maybe your father told you something about this man. What did you hear from your father about Nazir Torekulov?
أذكر فعلا ليس فقط الوالد ولكن أيضا الوالدة.
I remember about Nazir Torekulov not only from the stories of my father, but also from my mother's stories, because they were family friends, saw each other and visited each other often. My mother was friends with the wife of the Soviet ambassador. He did a lot to develop relations between Saudi Arabia and the Soviet Union. My father used to tell me how the ambassador accompanied him on a trip to the Soviet Union that lasted 10 days. The relationship between my father and Torekulov was trusting and very warm. So when the ambassador was recalled back to Moscow in 1936 and executed, when he became a victim of terror, like thousands, hundreds of thousands of Soviet people, then a decision was made to completely sever all ties between the kingdom and the Soviet Union. While the Union existed, no relationship was maintained. They were only resumed after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991.
As a result of the disruption of diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, the Soviet Union lost substantial economic benefits because just a year after the death of Nazir Torekulov, huge oil deposits were discovered in the bowels of the Arabian Desert. The country, which the Soviet government deemed as lacking promise, became one of the richest countries in the world. Today, relations between Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan are close and friendly, based on the mutual respect and trust. The kingdom was one of the first countries to recognize the independence of Kazakhstan, and for 30 years, we have been strengthening and developing this friendship and partnership, the foundation of which was laid almost 100 years ago by the first Kazakh diplomat, Nazir Torekulov. Nazir Torekulov is a representative of that great cohort of Kazakh intellectuals and leaders of their era, who, like many of his associates, were unjustly convicted and killed in the prime of their life. In 1937, he was barely 46 years old. By this age, Torekulov had accomplished a lot, but he could have done even more. He loved his homeland and his people very much, but by the will of fate, spent most of his life in a foreign land. He was buried in the foreign land as well. Kommunarka, a special NKVD facility. To put it simply, it was one large mass grave, where more than 6,000 people found their lost refuge, unjustly convicted and shot by the repressive bodies of the Stalinist regime in the blood-stained 1937. This facility was classified until 1999. However, even up to this day, not all the names of those who were buried here have been disclosed. Nevertheless, according to the data from the Memorial Foundation received from the Russian Federal Security Service, the burial place of Nazir Torekulov is located here, in Kommunarka, not far from Moscow.